The dim light of the coffee shop flickered, casting dancing shadows on the worn stone walls. The aroma of roasted coffee mingled with the scent of aged wood, creating a cozy, yet shadowed atmosphere. Here, amidst crowded tables, far from the indifferent gaze of the court, young people sought to forget their dilemmas and the excesses of society. But I, Samara, was just an attentive waitress, an observer of the dynamics unfolding around me. I moved between the tables, serving mugs and plates, and it was in this routine that I began to feel a deepening emptiness. This was before I spotted a secluded corner, where a solemn presence stood out in the gloom. A young man seated solemnly, his eyes lost in the distance. His slender fingers caressed a gleaming ring that shimmered like a lost star. My heart quickened as I recognized the symbol, the royal signet ring of the mute son of the vampire king. He was there, among all of us, yet still invisible. In that moment, a phrase echoed in my mind, repetitive and insistent. What's marked will always find its way. The revelation nearly stopped me in my tracks. It was him, the outcast of the court, a being who had never received his father's love. The darkness surrounding him seemed to expand, as if the coffee shop itself became an abyss, and we, dancing shadows. Analyzing him, I realized that his clothes, though well-made, seemed heavy, as if carrying an invisible burden. His breath was held, unable to escape, and I wanted to understand what lay behind that profound silence. It was a pain more intense than any scream, the anguish of a being condemned to muteness in a world that only valued eloquence. A sudden tension crackled in the air. I could feel it. The coffee shop was full, but there was an emptiness around him, a space that pulsed with a latent threat. The gaze of a brazen customer fixed on the young man, and in her eyes was something cruel, a scorn that could easily cut like a sharp sword. The contrast between those who laughed and enjoyed themselves, oblivious to the pain of others, and the boy alone in his corner pained me. I silently wished for a time when he wouldn't have to hide. The dark truths of the court echoed in my mind, and the awareness that time was running out for all of us permeated the heavy air. I knew I had to move, but how? With a young man at the mercy of an aristocratic faction that didn't tolerate imperfections, my desire to act fought against the fear of what would come next. Like a trembling light, I had found the path to a new beginning in the most unexpected place. But the journey was just beginning. I needed more than simple observations. I needed to get closer, to make that silence become a cry of hope. Little did I know that by committing to understanding his silence, my life would soon change forever. In a fleeting instant, the connection I sought became inevitable. In the silence of my room, shadows seemed to invade the space, an extension of the same darkness that surrounded the mute son of the king. The scent of coffee still lingered on my nostalgic palate, but the symphony of laughter and voices that filled the coffee shop had already faded from my mind. In the dead of night, memories began to resonate, a drumbeat in my suffocated heart, each one heavier than the last. I remembered every glance I exchanged while walking through the castle corridors, silver glances that seemed to gnaw at the flesh, full of subtle disdain and undeniable arrogance. I recalled the innumerable conversations among the nobles about the future of the bloodline, whispers about the prince, always the perfect prince, so far from the solitary mute I had found. In my mind, comparisons were already forming, laughter echoing as the boy was scorned. What would his life be like? What did that young heart feel enduring the eternal condemnation of silence? The stories of his life hit me like poisoned arrows. I heard invisible victims shared tales of a boy closed off within himself, a being condemned to wander the dark corridors of the palace, where love and acceptance seemed a distant luxury. He had never received a kind glance, a loving touch, or the praise every child should hear. In his fine clothes there was more than luxurious fabric. The pain of an ignored prince was visibly pressed within them. One night, while organizing glasses in the coffee shop, I found a note lost between the pages of an old menu. The handwriting was quick and nervous, not unlike what I often saw in the hands of hurried servants and nobles. The message invaded my heart like an alarm. "Help him. He is not as they say," the note read. It made me tremble. A whispering voice told me there was a hidden path, a quest for justice, intertwined with the court's machinations and excesses. With each misadventure I dared to recount, more questions arose in my mind. How could I, a simple waitress, help bring forth the worth of a mute prince, a silent voice in a court full of tyrants? What if they discovered I was operating behind the scenes? The fear was palpable, but there was also an intense fire within me, burning with a determination I never knew I possessed. I grappled with moral dilemmas that increasingly permeated my existence. I sought a purpose that transcended the everyday, an effort to unite what society had separated. Even when the idea of making contact with him seemed insane, the image of his face and the fragility in his hands encouraged me to move forward. I knew that in his solitude there was an invisible connection waiting to be discovered. A new cycle was approaching. The echo of challenges as the nobles conspired, gathering in the shadows. A coup was being planned, a faction within the court that wished to eliminate any trace of imperfection. And at the center of it all, there he was, a silent prince and a royal signet ring, symbol of a disputed future. Time was running out, and every passing second was a deepening shadow. I was about to throw myself into an abyss, and that abyss could lead me to the deepest unknown or to a much clearer dawn. I would move forward. The search for the silence that yearned to be heard had begun. It was a sunny day, but the warmth seemed to have vanished the moment I entered the coffee shop. The air was heavy with unspoken secrets, and I felt like an infiltrator in hostile territory. The dilemma burned within me, a flame that could consume everything if not controlled. I needed to understand the pain behind the silence of that young prince, and the best way to do that would be beyond the safety of the tables, delving into the world that surrounded him. As soon as I looked around, I noticed my co-workers fervently discussing the rumors circulating in the castle's passages. I was drawn to the conversation, like a moth to the flame of uncertainty. There was something in the tone of their voices that made my stomach churn. They knew more than they were willing to say. One of them mentioned the faction that aimed for the elimination of the impure. The contrast with my everyday life became even more pronounced. Who were the impure? I didn't know. But the sheer superior posturing of the nobles, coupled with their lack of compassion, wounded my soul. I gathered my courage, and while serving more coffee, approached discreetly. In a casual tone, I questioned one of the waiters about what was happening in the castle. "The prince," he said in a whisper, as if the very name could bring ruin. "He is despised by everyone, even by his father." The pain in his voice hit me like a punch to the gut. "And the nobles, they want a perfect heir, one who won't bring shame to the bloodline. If they knew what I truly intended, they would be certain I shouldn't get involved in that dance of shadows. But time kept slipping through my fingers, like sand in a distorted desert. Beyond the malicious jokes of the nobles, something deeper was at stake. The factions were moving, and I needed to discover their true intentions. That night, I decided to move closer to the castle, an act of courage that sent shivers down my spine. The high, solemn walls seemed to watch me. Shadows followed me as if they wanted to swallow me whole. The sun was setting, and the lamp flames illuminated the tense faces of guards, whose iron armor gleamed in a heavy and oppressive structure. As soon as I reached the side entrance, I hid in the shadows and let my heart guide my steps. In the quiet of the corridor, I strained to hear the echoes of footsteps. They were muffled voices. I hid behind a column and watched the nobles gathered around a table covered in melted candles. They discussed in low voices, cowards in their conspiracy. "We must act fast," whispered a man with a severe look, gesticulating exaggeratedly. "The faction will not allow a bastard like him to remain among us." The urgency of the situation paralyzed me. Could they be planning something for the mute prince? A knot formed in my throat, a mixture of fear and determination. Every word they exchanged became a sharp, explicit blade in my mind. I needed to know more. I was in an abyss, in a world where loyalties were as fragile as crystal and silences carried deadly meanings. A dizzying tension hung in the air, and with every word I caught, I felt my own life intertwine with the fate of that young man. With meticulous care, I prepared for the next step. I knew that silence could very well transform into the most powerful of weapons, but I hadn't yet discovered how to navigate the situation we were in. Now, everything depended on my next move. The noble's coup reverberated in my mind, a deafening roar that overshadowed reason. The sense of urgency gave me no peace. How could I, a simple waitress, dream of confronting powerful figures who engineered the ruin of a mute prince? Clad as a shadow, yet courage pulsed in my veins. I knew the malicious words in the next room were laced with poison, threatening not only his life, but the entire structure I considered safe. Remaining safe behind the column, my hands clenched with anxiety, I watched the group slowly disperse after their tense dialogue. It was the only opportunity I would have to act. I had to be quick and discreet. Without time to hesitate, I followed the nobles through a secondary passage, in a risky game between solitude and insurrection. The corridors were dark, corridors I knew, but which now seemed strange and hostile. The echo of footsteps reverberated, each sound stirring a melancholic anxiety in my heart. The nobles' voices had fallen silent, but the threat still hung like a dark cloud. If I could only reach him, perhaps I could save the lifeline that was about to be cut. I skillfully dodged guards and hid in alcoves, avoiding the lanterns that cast shadows like claws. Deep down in my anxieties, I knew I needed to find the prince before the faction plotted something irreversible. With every step I took, I imagined his burden and the pain he might carry, and the desire to rescue him became an anchor that guided me. Finally, after a winding journey, I found a half-open door that led to a small inner garden, illuminated by the silvery moonlight. It was a refuge, a place lost amidst the labyrinth of intrigues. And there he was, the mute prince, solitary as the night itself. I felt a tremor of relief, but immediately reality imposed itself like a storm. I needed to be careful. My approach was slow. Each step felt daring, as if I were invading a sacred temple. When he turned his gaze towards me, a mix of surprise and confusion crossed his face. I felt he was wondering who I was, what I wanted. With a gentle gesture, I raised my hands in a sign of peace, trying to convey that I was not a threat. "I am not an enemy," I murmured, the words heavier than a confession. His initially alert expression slowly dissolved into something that resembled hope, as if, for the first time in a long time, someone truly saw him. Stammering slightly, I made sure to explain what I had heard, how the nobles' voices plotted against him, and how they wanted to eliminate him. "I need you to trust me," I pleaded. "We can't let this happen." For an instant, the silence was palpable, as if the very air we breathed was suspended. With a reluctant gesture, he approached, gently touching the brooch that adorned his cloak. It was a symbol, one that carried the weight of family and kingdom, but also the freedom of someone who could still change destiny. But I knew words were only half the battle. I needed to devise a plan. The battle ahead was more than just a personal struggle. It was a conflict between light and darkness, where the future of the kingdom could be shaped by a young mute prince and a girl who dared to speak out. The path ahead revealed itself, full of risks and secrets. The shadows were closing in, and I knew every second counted. With night falling around us, a new world lay in wait, waiting to be explored. The silence of the garden enveloped us like a current of tension. The mute prince, who had barely manifested himself, now expressed an urgent need in his gaze. He was pleading for a plan that could change his destiny and that of the kingdom. The glimmer of his hope ignited a new boldness within me. What would we do next? We, an unlikely pair, facing an imminent battle. Slowly his gestures began to translate into a clear drawing, a tree representing a network of secret allies within the palace. The prince had friends, loyal servants who opposed the cruelty of the nobles. I needed to articulate this idea into a solid plan. "We need to find them," I gestured, fervor burning in my chest. But suddenly a noise cut through the air, like the clank of approaching armor. I looked at the prince, and in an instant I realized running was not an option. Shadows began to move towards our hiding place. Adrenaline surged, quickening every beat of my heart. I suspected the opposing faction was already looking for us, and the safety of our plan concerned us. A hiding place, I thought. As the prince led, I held his hand and followed him through the corridors. We arrived at a forgotten library whose dust-covered shelves whispered secrets of the past. The moonlight cast a soft glow over the books. A perfect place to discuss strategies, far from malicious eyes. As soon as we closed the door, our breath seemed to escape us. The tension still hung in the air, but there was a comfort there. It was a pause between chaos. The prince looked at me, and I understood that he expected more from me, that he was ready to act. This wasn't just about us. It was about freedom, about a new era we wished to build. With a decisive gesture, he indicated the ancient volumes around us. Knowledge, I realized. It would be crucial to understand the weaknesses of our enemies. Together, we would delve into those texts, searching for strategies and hidden allies. It was a step that defied established norms, a path towards the hope that burned in our hearts. But the fight wouldn't be easy. Time was running against us, and the enemy faction was closing in. I looked at the prince, whose eyes now shone with a new purpose. As soon as we began to turn the pages, a plan began to take shape, a significant strategy that could favor our side. This was the first stage. We would re-emerge as a force to be reckoned with. I stood up, with fierce determination in my eyes, and with the strength of a growing bond between us, I whispered to the prince, "We won't let them tear down a future we can still shape." With that, we decided our meeting would not just be a conversation full of uncertainties, but the starting point for light to truly prevail over the darkness that plagued the kingdom. The night continued to stretch like a heavy cloak, but the library had become a temporary home of hope. With books all around us, I delved into reading, searching among the pages for reservoirs of wisdom that would underpin our resistance. Every letter pulsed, as if whispering forgotten secrets of ancient battles fought between nobles and commoners, a dance of power and betrayal that shaped the destiny of a kingdom. The prince, wrapped in his own silent concentration, scanned texts about fragile alliances, broken loyalties, and the historical pitfalls that could protect or consume us. Our glances crossed frequently, a wordless dialogue that gestured our unity and determination. Unbeknownst to us, the hours melted away, the echoes of the night slowly replaced by a new vigor. Finally, we found a passage that called for action. It described a ritual known as the Shadow Command, an ancient ceremony that allowed for the summoning of loyal allies and instant communication through symbols uniquely associated with the royal bloodline. Hearing the description of the ritual, a spark ignited in my spirit. "We will touch the minds and hearts of those who still fight for justice," I murmured, considering the gravity of each word. The prince nodded, his eyes burning with renewed determination. It was risky, but the potential to gather forces against our adversaries was not lost on us. It was an opportunity to cross the line between shadows and light. We would just need a sacred, proper location, a chamber accessible to us, where the ceremony could be performed without interruption from the nobles. The prince then began to draw on the stone floor, an ancient symbol that spoke of old inheritances and unbreakable bonds. The image he formed reminded me of the brooch he wore, and I realized this ritual meant much more than just summoning allies. It was a commitment to our destiny. The tension in the library began to intensify, the weight of the journey ahead becoming palpable. A distant noise broke my thought and froze us. I ran to the vine-covered window and peered out. There was no doubt the movement in the wing was agitated. Someone suspected our presence. We needed to hurry. "We'll perform the ceremony tomorrow night," I suggested, urgency fueling every word. We would use the cloak of darkness to strengthen ourselves and prepare our strategy. The prince gestured, visibly excited, and understanding formed between us. It was the turning point we had longed for. As we gathered the books and notes, a sense of expectation and fear hung over us. This wasn't just a risk, it was a new beginning. A resistance was about to blossom in the shadows, fueled by our desire for freedom. The prince made a silent and subtle gesture, marking a trace of union between us. As if with each divine curve of his movement, a new pact was being sealed. We walked together to the library exit, attentive to the echoes of the world beyond our walls. If we could execute the plan, we would not only draw a new future, but also ignite the flame of hope in those who felt lost. The battle was just beginning, and the light of dawn peered beyond the darkness. The resistance grew, and we would be its voice. The night before our meeting was heavy, interlaced with expectation and deep fears. When the sun finally rose, the cloak of darkness began to dissipate, revealing a new landscape, full of uncertainties, but also of promises. The young man who was merely an incapable heir was now a prince seeking his rebellion. As footsteps echoed in the corridors, we gathered a small group of those we could trust, servants and guards, united by loyalty and the hope of a different future, formed a semicircle around us. When I explained the plan, the shadow ritual, glances of doubt and faith met. Defying the order of the kingdom was an act of courage, but together we were a beacon of light in the dark times ahead. As twilight approached, our determination grew. The chosen location for the ritual was a forgotten chamber situated in an abandoned corridor. With torn tapestries and candles in hand, we began to carefully create the altar. The environment resonated with ancient echoes that made each of our steps feel like a reverberation of a past marked by struggles and victories. I established the guidelines of the ritual, not just to invoke allies, but also to create a bond that would unite those who opposed tyranny. As the prince drew symbols of power on the floor, the understanding between us strengthened. He was no longer a passive spectator. He became a leader, determined to rescue his kingdom from the clutches of oppression. Time passed with alarming speed. The room began to fill with anticipation, and the ideal moment approached. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable energy, as if the resistance was already germinating among us. I closed my eyes, absorbing the whispers of those who came before, feeling that we were not alone, and that the strength of 1,000 past voices guided us. As the ritual began, a sudden breeze swept through the room, as if the palace itself was responding to our call. The candle flames wavered and the connection formed. Here was the turning point, to summon the ancient warriors in search of justice and freedom. The prince, by my side, showed confidence in his gaze. When we opened our eyes, the area around us seemed to vibrate with a new force. The faces of those present reflected not just hope, but the certainty that each of us was becoming part of something greater. We were the resistance, and determination now united us as never before. With a discreet nod, the prince reminded us of the reason we were fighting, of the possibility of a future where the light we longed for would never fade. We left the chamber knowing that the battle was about to begin. Darkness would not intimidate us, for with that newfound light, we became a force that could not be contained. And so, with determination pulsing in our veins, we took the first steps towards the battle that would change not only our lives, but had the power to transform the kingdom. The approaching battle pulsed like an anxious drum in our chests. Every step we took towards the throne room was a mix of adrenaline and anticipation. We knew the rival faction was already stirring with concerns, but our determination was ironclad. With each breath, we felt the connection we had formed, like invisible bonds, uniting us in a web of purpose. The castle, once a sanctuary of oppression, now seemed to vibrate with a new energy. Traversing the dark corridors, the echoes of our voices ushered in a new reality. The prince in front conveyed a silent command, and our glances intertwined in silent promises of loyalty. Upon reaching the throne room, the opulence of the place seemed to crumble under the weight of our collective presence. Ornate benches, luxurious tapestries, and the noble's ostentation could no longer conceal the pit of corruption that permeated every corner. It was time to break with tradition, to confront old enemies and discuss a new future before everyone. The nobles were gathered, engrossed in their intrigues and secrets. In this room we raised our voices. The prince now was a true monarch in the making. He positioned himself at the front, and each of us took our place beside him, like a wall of determination. The space was about to be invaded by a storm of truth. "Today, darkness will not prevail," I declared, giving voice to the prince's silent command, and my words echoed through the stone walls like a roar. The nobles looked first with incredulity, then with concern, as we, his resistance, raised our fists in solidarity. The atmosphere shifted. We ceased to be mere subjects and became agents of our own transformation. Whispered conversations exploded into protests. Accusations of treason were hurled, but we could no longer be silenced. In this kingdom, the bloodlines that define the nobles are stained by lies. It is time to break those shackles. With every word, we saw the power of our determination echo in the room. The voices became a wave. There, within that grand hall, we began to forge a new pact, not between nobles and servants, but between all who sought justice. New alliances began to emerge, some unexpected, as old enemies set aside their prejudices to join our cry for freedom. But as the atmosphere shifted, I knew the rival faction would not remain inert. Every slight movement I perceived further back in the shadows was a reminder of imminent betrayal and the hunters who roamed the palace, ready to intervene. I felt that time was running out and a final confrontation was approaching. With tension etched on every face in the room, the prince turned to me and paused, allowing his confidence to shine in his gaze. "We are ready to fight. We are ready to be the change," I declared, giving voice to the prince's unwavering resolve. My words resonated, injecting new life into those around us. Our future was being shaped by the bonds we had formed, but also by the fire that burned within us. There was no turning back. Thus, like an approaching storm, we risked everything in pursuit of freedom. If the night was not our ally, then let the dawn be the witness to our struggle. Filled with determination, we left the room, ready to face any storm that approached, and to shape a new kingdom of light.